The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, sliding through the mail slot of Claire Morrison's Chicago brownstone like a knife through her carefully constructed piece. Heavy cream cardstock, elegant calligraphy, the kind of formal announcement that belonged to people who hadn't spent the last 18 months navigating the aftermath of sudden widowhood. Claire Elizabeth Morrison and Daniel James Fitzgerald request the pleasure of your company. Claire's hands trembled as she read her own name, still barely believing the reality of what she was about to do. In 3 weeks, she would marry Danny, her late husband Michael's best friend since childhood, the man who had delivered Michael's eulogy, the person who knew better than anyone how impossible this decision had been. The doorbell rang before Claire could process the weight of holding her own wedding invitation. Through the frosted glass, she could see Danny's familiar silhouette, tall and slightly stooped in the way he'd carried himself since high school, always trying to take up less space than his 6'3" frame demanded. "You got yours too," he said when she opened the door, holding up an identical invitation. His green eyes, so different from Michael's warm brown ones, searched her face with the careful attention he'd shown her for the past year and a half. "It feels surreal," Claire admitted, stepping aside to let him into the house that still felt too much like Michael's, too little like hers. "Seeing our names together like that." Danny closed the door gently behind him, the same way he did everything, with deliberate care, as if the world were made of things that might break if handled too roughly. "Claire, are you sure about this? Really sure? Because if you're having second thoughts, don't." Claire cut him off, not unkindly but firmly. "We've been through this. We both know why we're doing this, and we both know it's the right thing." Danny nodded, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he was fighting something he wanted to say. After 20 years of friendship with Michael, and 18 months of whatever this complicated relationship with Claire had become, she'd learned to read Danny's silences as well as his words. "The Kellys RSVP'd no," Danny said, settling into the armchair that had been Michael's favorite spot for reading Sunday morning newspapers. "Janet said she thinks it's too soon, and that Michael would be rolling in his grave." Claire felt the familiar stab of judgment that had followed her decision to accept Danny's proposal. The whispers at the grocery store, the pointed silences. At church, the way some of Michael's family members had stopped calling altogether. "Let me guess. She thinks I'm dishonoring Michael's memory by moving on too quickly with his best friend." "Something like that." Danny's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd been defending their choices for months. "I told her that Michael's memory is exactly why we're doing this, but..." He trailed off, and Claire finished the thought. "But she doesn't know what we know." No one knows what we know. The secret sat between them like a third presence in the room. The truth that made their upcoming marriage seem not like a betrayal of Michael's memory, but like the fulfillment of his final wish. The truth that only 3 people had ever known, and now only 2 were left to carry it. Claire walked to the mantel where Michael's photo still held place of honor. His easy smile captured at last year's company picnic, just 2 months before the heart attack that took him at 34 without warning. Next to it sat a smaller frame containing a photo from their college days. Michael, Danny, and Claire at graduation, arms around each other, laughing at something Danny had said. They'd been inseparable then, the 3 of them, until Claire chose Michael and Danny stepped gracefully aside. "I keep thinking about what people will say at the reception," Claire said. "All those faces wondering how we could do this to Michael." "Let them wonder." Danny stood up and joined her at the mantel, his presence solid and comforting in the way it had been since the day they'd met in Professor Morrison's American Literature class sophomore year. "The people who matter know us well enough to trust that we wouldn't do this lightly." Claire touched the frame holding Michael's photo, remembering the conversation that had changed everything. It had been a Sunday evening in January, 6 months, after the funeral, when Danny had appeared at her door with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands. "I need to tell you something," he'd said. "Something Michael made me promise to tell you if anything ever happened to him." The memory of that night still made Claire's chest tight with grief and gratitude in equal measure. Michael, who'd always thought 3 steps ahead, who'd planned for contingencies Claire had never imagined needing. "Claire," Danny's voice brought her back to the present. "There's something else, something I haven't told you." She turned to, face him fully, noting the way he was fidgeting with his watch, the same nervous habit he'd had since college. "I heard from Michael's cardiologist yesterday. Dr. Patterson called me directly." Claire felt her stomach drop. "Why would he call you?" "Because I'm listed as your emergency contact now, and he wanted to discuss your genetic testing results with someone." The genetic testing. Claire had almost forgotten about the blood work Dr. Patterson had ordered after Michael's sudden death, trying to determine if there were hereditary factors that might affect her own health or any future children. "The results came back," Danny continued carefully. "Claire, Michael's heart condition, it wasn't just random, it's hereditary, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And the genetic mutation that causes it, it's dominant." Claire stared at him, processing. "The implications. Meaning? Meaning if you and Michael had had children, there would have been a 50% chance of passing it on. Dr. Patterson said Michael knew. He'd been tested years ago after his father died of the same condition." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Michael knew, he knew and never told me. He was going to tell you. Dr. Patterson said they'd discussed it several times, that Michael was planning to have the conversation with you this year. He wanted to make sure you understood the implications before you started trying for kids." Claire sank onto the couch, feeling like she was learning about her husband all over again 6 months after burying him. "We'd been talking about starting a family. We were going to try this spring." "I know." Danny's voice was gentle. "Michael talked to me about it. He was terrified, Claire. Terrified of passing on the condition that killed his father. Terrified of leaving you widowed and alone. Terrified of dying young and abandoning his children the way his dad abandoned him." Claire thought about Michael's father, Robert, who died of a sudden heart attack when Michael was 12. She remembered how Michael would sometimes get quiet around Father's Day, how he'd occasionally make comments about not wanting to repeat his father's mistakes. She'd assumed he meant the drinking, the workaholic tendencies. She'd never realized he meant dying young. "There's more," Danny said quietly. "Michael asked me to promise him something. If anything happened to him, and if you wanted children, he wanted me to make sure you had that option, with someone who could give you healthy kids and be there to raise them." The words hung in the air between them, and Claire finally understood the deeper layer of Michael's final request to Danny. It hadn't just been about making sure she wasn't alone. It had been about making sure she could have the family they'd dreamed of, without the genetic shadow that had haunted Michael his entire adult life. "He planned this," Claire said slowly. "Even the marriage part. He knew you loved me." Danny's face flushed, but he didn't deny it. Michael always knew. Even in college, he knew. He used to joke that if anything ever happened to him, at least, he'd know you'd be with someone who would love you the way you deserved. "And you agreed to this? To marry me because Michael asked you to?" "No." Danny's response was immediate and firm. "I agreed to tell you about his request because I promised him I would. I proposed to you because I've been in love with you for 15 years, and losing Michael made me realize that life is too short to spend it wanting things you think you can't have." Claire felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally spill over. "Danny, I can't ask you to spend your life being Michael's substitute." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." "Claire, do you think this would be easier for me if I didn't love you? Do you think I'd be willing to face all the judgment and whispers if this were just some duty to a dead friend? But what if I can never love you the way I loved Michael? What if you're always second choice?" Danny knelt in front of the couch, taking her hands in his calloused ones, hands that fixed motorcycles and built furniture, and had held her while she cried in the months after Michael's death. "Michael was your first love, your husband, the father of dreams you thought you were going to fulfill together. I don't want to replace that, Claire. I want to build something different with you, something that honors what you had with him while creating space for what we could have together. And children? If you want them, yes. If you don't, that's okay too. But if we do have kids, they'll be ours, Claire. Not replacement children for the ones you can't have with Michael, but children we create together because we choose to build a family. That evening, after Danny left, Claire called her sister Emma in Portland. "I got the invitation," Emma said before Claire could even say hello. "It's beautiful. How are you feeling?" "Confused, grateful, guilty, terrified." "That sounds about right for someone getting married in 3 weeks." Claire told Emma about the genetic testing results, about Michael's secret fears, about the deeper understanding of why Danny had made his promise. "Oh, Claire," Emma said softly, "Michael was trying to take care of you even after he was gone. But is it fair to Danny? To marry him knowing that part of the reason is because Michael asked him to take care of me? Honey, from what you've told me, Danny has been taking care of you by choice for 18 months. The promise to Michael might have given him permission to speak up, but it didn't create his feelings. People are going to think we're dishonoring Michael's memory. People thought the same thing when Jackie Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis. Sometimes widows remarry quickly, not because they've forgotten their first husband, but because they've learned how precious and fragile happiness is." The wedding was small, held in the garden behind Claire's house on a warm April morning. Only family and the closest friends attended, people who knew Claire and Danny well enough to understand that their marriage was an act of love, not betrayal. Claire wore a simple cream dress, not white. She'd been married in white before to Michael, and this felt different. Not lesser, but different. Danny wore a navy suit with a tie that had belonged to Michael, a small gesture that acknowledged the friend who had brought them together, and whose blessing had made their union possible. Father Mackenzie, who had married Claire and Michael 5 years earlier, performed the ceremony. In his homily, he spoke about different kinds of love: the passionate first love of youth, the mature love built on shared history and mutual respect, the sacrificial love that puts another's happiness above one's own comfort. Michael Morrison loved his wife enough to want her happiness even after his death, Father Mackenzie said. Daniel Fitzgerald loved his friend enough to honor that request, and loves Claire enough to build a marriage on truth rather than convenience. This is not a story of betrayal, but of grace. When Danny kissed Claire at the altar, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not the electric passion of new love, but something steadier and warmer. The kiss of two people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of what they were taking on, who were committed to building something meaningful from the ashes of loss. The reception was held at the Riverside Country Club, where Claire and Michael had celebrated their own wedding reception. Some people might have found it morbid, but for Claire it felt like continuity, acknowledging that this new chapter was built on the foundation of what had come before, not in opposition to it. During the father-daughter dance, Claire's dad whispered in her ear, "Michael would be happy, sweetheart. He'd want you to have love and children and a full life." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I knew Michael Morrison almost as well as you did, and I know he loved you enough to want your happiness more than his memory." Later, as Claire and Danny were leaving for their modest honeymoon in Napa Valley, Claire's mother-in-law approached them. Sandra Morrison had been cool toward the marriage, struggling with what felt like her son being replaced so quickly. "Danny," Sandra said, her voice tight with emotion, "I want you to know. Michael talked to me about you once, about 6 months before he died." Danny waited, clearly unsure what was coming. "He said that if anything ever happened to him, he hoped Claire would find someone who loved her the way you did. He said he'd watched you love her from a distance for years, and that he knew you'd never act on it while he was alive, but that you'd be good to her if she'd let you." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't understand then what he meant. I thought it was just hypothetical talk. But now I think my son knew his time was limited, and he was trying to arrange for Claire to be cared for." She hugged Danny tightly. "Take care of her. Love her the way Michael would want her to be loved." 6 months into their marriage, Claire discovered she was pregnant. The news came with a complex mix of joy and grief. Joy for the child she and Danny had created together, grief for the children she would never have with Michael. "Are you happy?" Danny asked that evening as they sat in their backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Yes, Claire said, surprised by how completely true it was. I'm happy in a way I didn't think I'd ever be. Again after Michael died. Even though this isn't the life you planned, Claire thought about the question seriously. I've learned that the life you plan and the life you get are rarely the same thing. But sometimes the life you get, even when it comes from loss and grief, can be beautiful in ways you never expected. Their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy baby girl they named Hope Michelle. Hope for the future they were building together, Michelle to honor the man whose love had made their family possible. At Hope's baptism, Father Mackenzie spoke about how children are living symbols of hope, proof that life continues and love multiplies, even in the face of loss. This child, he said, is the product of many kinds of love. The love between her parents, the love of a friend who kept a promise, and the love of a man who wanted his wife's happiness even after his own life ended. As Claire held her daughter, during the ceremony she felt Michael's presence not as a ghost haunting her new life, but as a blessing over it. Danny's hand rested on her shoulder, steady and warm, and she realized that she had learned something profound about love in the years since Michael's death. Love wasn't finite. The love she'd shared with Michael didn't diminish the love she'd built with Danny. Her capacity for love had expanded to include both men, both relationships, both the life she'd lost and the life she'd found. "Thank you," she whispered to Danny as they left the church. "For what?" "For keeping your promise to Michael, for loving me enough to wait, for building something beautiful with me instead of just trying to replace what was lost." Danny shifted Hope to one arm and pulled Claire close with the other. "Thank you for letting me." That evening, as they put Hope to bed in the nursery Danny had spent weeks preparing, Claire thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The grief, the judgment, the complex navigation of loving someone new while honoring someone lost. People still whispered sometimes, still questioned whether their marriage was appropriate or whether they'd moved too fast. But Claire had learned that the opinions of others mattered far less than the truth of what she and Danny had built together. Their marriage wasn't a betrayal of Michael's memory. It was the fulfillment of his deepest wish for her happiness. And sometimes, Claire had learned, the most profound acts of love come not from the living, but from those who love us enough to want our joy even after they're gone. Michael had given her permission to love again, and Danny had given her the courage to do it. Together, they'd created something that honored the past while embracing the future, a family built on loss but sustained by hope, a love story that proved that sometimes the most beautiful chapters come after you think the book has ended.